Today we're going to start off with simplifying radicals. So if we look, we have the square root of 96 or radical 96. What we need to do is figure out where 96 falls in our perfect squares. So if we look at it, it falls between 10 squared and 9 squared. 10 squared is 100, 9 squared equals 81, and 96 is right in the middle. So what we do is we look and we take each of our perfect squares and we divide 96 by them to see if we get a simplified number. So if we divide 96 by 100, it does not work. So we mark it off. We divide 96 by 81, it doesn't work. So we just keep working our way down. So we get 8 squared, which is 64. 96 divided by 64 does not work. 7 squared, which is 49. 96 divided by 49 does not work. 6 squared equals 36. 96 divided by 36 does not go in evenly. 5 squared equals 25. 96 divided by 25 does not work. Then we go to 4 squared. 4 squared equals 16. When we divide 96 by 16, we get 6, so that does work. So we're going to break this down into the square root of 16 times 6. 16 times 6 gives me 96. So then, now that I have it broken up, I can split it into two separate radicals, like that. Then I think, what is the square root of 16? Square root of 16 is 4. And then if I try to simplify the square root of 6, I can't find any numbers that go into it, meaning one of them is a perfect square. So I leave it as the square root of 6. So this is my answer, 4 rad 6. Okay, moving on to the next one, I have the square root of 12 or radical 12. I do the same process. So the square root of 12 falls in between 4 squared, which is 16, and 3 squared, which is 9. So 12 is right here. So we start looking. 16, so we start with 16. So 12 divided by 16, that does not go into it evenly. 12 divided by 9 does not go into evenly. So we go to 2 squared, which is 4. 4 does go into 12 evenly. 4 goes into 12 3 times, so we write 4 times 3. Then we split it up. The square root of 4 times the square root of 3. Square root of 4 is 2. We cannot simplify the square root of 3, so it stays that, and we get 2 rad 3. Now we have fractions. A lot of people get scared of fractions. Don't be. Okay, we just split it up like we've been doing. So we take the square root of 25 over the square root of 36. What's the square root of 25? It's 5. The square root of 36 is 6. And that is our answer. Okay, now notice we have negatives under the radical. One thing we need to know is when we take the square root of a -1, we get the letter I for imaginary numbers. So how I do this is I break it down to my number times a -1. Well, 36 is a perfect square, so I can split it up like this. The square root of 36 times the square root of -1. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of -1 is I. And that is my simplified radical. Okay, next example, we have the square root of -12. So I break it down to 12 times -1. 12 is not a perfect square. We did this example earlier, but let's do it again. So 12 falls in between 4 squared, which is 16, and 3 squared, which is 9. So 12 is right here in the middle somewhere. Okay, 16, remember, did not go into 12 evenly. 9 did not go into 12 evenly, so I go up to 2 squared, which is 4, and that worked. So I break down 12 to 4 times 3 times -1. So then I take the square root of 4 times the square root of 3 times the square root of -1. Square root of 4 is 2. We cannot simplify the square root of 3. And then the square root of -1 is I, and we write that next to the 2 in front of the radical so we don't get it confused for being under the radical. So my answer is 2I rad 3. Okay, my last example, notice now I have a number out front. This means that we are multiplying by 3, so anything that comes out of the radical, we have to make sure that we multiply it by 3. Okay, so 72 falls in between what numbers? Okay, it falls between 9 squared, which is 81, and 8 squared, which is 64. So 72 is somewhere around here. Okay, so that's what we need to do. Remember, we have 3 times 72 times a negative 1. So 81 does not go into 72 evenly if we were to divide it. 72 divided by 64, that does not go evenly. 7 squared, which is 49. We take 72 divided by 49, that does not go into it evenly. Then we have 6 squared, which is 36. When I do 72 divided by 36, that does go into it evenly. So I'm going to break down this radical into 36 times 2 times negative 1. Okay, so still remember we're multiplying by that 3, so I have 3 times the square root of 36 times the square root of 2 times the square root of negative 1. Then I say, well, 3 times the square root of 36 is 6, so now I have 3 times 6 on the outside. I cannot simplify the square root of 2, so it stays square root of 2. Square root of negative 1 is I. Then I have to simplify these two. 3 times 6 is 18, so I get 18i rad 2. So this is the video for simplifying radicals with imaginary numbers.